Welcome to Boost CYAC's new webinar series. I'm Jennifer Katz, and I'll be hosting the webinar today. Before we begin our sessions, just a few quick housekeeping points. For participants listening in French, click on Floor at the bottom left of the screen and then select French. To see and follow along with the PowerPoint presentation in English, click Presentation on the top left of the screen. To follow along with the presentation in French, download the French version of the presentation by clicking on Documents on the right. Feel free to download the presentation in both English and French by clicking on Documents on the right. There will be a Q&A during the last 5 minutes of the webinar. To submit your question, please go to the toolbar on the right, click on Messaging and then Participants, and type in your question. You can submit your questions at any time. If you are watching this webinar in a group, please enter the number of participants in the group by clicking on Messaging and then Participants. We will now begin our discussion. So thank you to Boost for having Toronto Public Health come today to give this talk about our Raising Sexually Healthy Children program. My name is Jennifer Katz. I am a sexual health promoter with Toronto Public Health, and I'm very excited to be here today. I'm going to give you a little bit of a background of what our program is, and then I'm going to give a bit of the program that we offer, just to show you a bit more about it. Before I begin, I just wanted to mention that Toronto Public Health does not own the images that are in this presentation. So feel free to download the PDF, but as far as using a presentation like this in the future, please contact Toronto Public Health and we can help organize some of the notes for you without the images. So I wanted to give a bit of information about sexual health promotion at Toronto Public Health. We are a community-based program. We operate in 3 different areas, main focuses. One of them are sexual health clinics across Toronto. These are free and accessible clinics for anyone in the area. You don't even have to live in the city to access them, and you don't have to have any insurance or identification cards. Anyone is welcome. And our sexual health promotion team does help staff the nursing and counseling there. As well, sexual health promotion helps out in the school systems. We help the teachers who are offering the health and physical education curriculum, and we just help capacity build them to offer this curriculum. And finally, a main part of our work is in the community. We do a lot of community programs dealing with all sorts of different things, sexual health. So that could include talking about birth control and STIs and gender and clinic services and relationships and consent, lots of different aspects of it. One of my favorite programs to talk about is the one that we're going to be talking about today, and it is called Raising Sexually Healthy Children. Oh, let me back up and tell you a little bit more about our resources. So sexual health promotion at Toronto Public Health has a lot of resources available for the community. All of our resources and our workshops are all free of charge for people within the City of Toronto. Some of the resources you can see on the screen now are ones that are available in the community, in schools, for various health and community agencies. If you have an interest in some of these, you can check them out on our website, or you can call into Toronto Public Health and we can either get them to you, or if you're outside of the Toronto area, we can show them to you electronically and we can have conversations about giving you access to sort of recreating, reprinting these in your own area with your own resource information on them as well. You can see that these resources I'm showing are available in French and in English. We do have some of the resources I'm going to talk about coming up in other languages as well. So the Raising Sexually Healthy Children program came about several years ago. Toronto Public Health has a lot of different parenting programs. We talk about nutrition and safety and health and dental care. And we were realizing that one thing as we talked to adults in sexual health clinics is that many of them didn't feel they had a lot of sexual health information as children, and it influenced their decision making as they became adults. So we wanted to create a forum, a place where parents and caregivers of kids could sit and talk about what are sometimes regarded as quite taboo subjects and how they can interact with their kids on these subjects. And that's where it initially began. We have a few other programs within Raising Sexually Healthy Children now. So it began with the parenting and caregiver program, which is still running. We also have a program called the Peer-Led Initiative Program. And this is a program where we teach a lot of the presentation that you're about to see to identified peer leaders in various communities who then take the information and they share it in their communities with their own cultural nuances and their own language. And we have this information available in about, I think it's 16 different languages at this point. You can see some of the resources that we have here are English, and we also have them available in French. We have resources in several other languages as well. They just have a bit of a different shape and look to them. The French and English are most updated. We also have a program of Raising Sexually Healthy Children directly focused towards child care and early learner environments. So like daycares and drop-in centers, things like that, where professionals are interacting with young children who are not their own children. They're interacting with them professionally. So I'll be touching on that quite a bit today as well, because the messaging is just a little bit different when they're not your own kids. We offer this program that I'm going to talk about in schools for teachers. We offer it, as I mentioned, to different parent drop-in centers, community centers. It could be available throughout many different places, lots of daycare and school PTA meetings, things like that. Anywhere where people are interested in listening, I'm interested in talking to them. I have 2 small children of my own at home, and I certainly understand how often these conversations, they come up. When Toronto Public Health goes out into the community talking about sexual health issues, we think it's very important that the public is aware, the community is aware of where we're coming from. So we have designed our sexual health philosophy and guiding principles. This document began internally just to help us understand what our philosophies were around sexual health. And then we created some of the documents that you see on the screen that we share with some of our community partners to make sure that before partnering with us, they're aware of where we stand as well. From this, we got thinking about how childcare centers may also benefit from such an idea of this. What you're seeing on the screen now is one example of a parent in daycare centers. Sometimes they have like a parent policy book or things like that where parents can sign on as they enter the daycare. And it could be ideas around fever and nutrition and infection control. And we mentioned to them, why not add something about sexual health as well? So this is an example of what one center in Toronto offers for their parent and caregivers. And it's something that we share during some of our training. We encourage people to let people know ahead of time, especially when children are involved, let them know what your ideas around sexuality are beforehand. It can be beneficial for the families so that if they come back later and say, why did you say such a thing to my child? We could say, well, it's in our policy that we believe in equity and we believe in truth, and we laid it out for you. And it can also help the childcare workers themselves feel good about their answers to kids, so that they know that their administration will stand up behind them based on the language that they use and the different philosophies that they add. So I'll get more into a bit of what I'm talking about. So when we offer the Raising Sexually Healthy Children program in the community, sometimes we call it by different names. Sometimes when we advertise something about sexuality and children, people are a bit nervous about that. So sometimes we call it something like talking to kids about bodies, talking to kids about safety, talking to kids about sexuality and boundaries. We're able to adapt this to what makes sense for the community. While at the same time, we don't want to surprise the community if they think they're coming in to talk about bike safety and suddenly we're talking about bodies. So I'm going to give you an example now. I'll keep referring to it as the Raising Sexually Healthy Children program, but be aware that this name does sometimes change. So the next group of slides are some slides that we often use in the community when talking to parents and caregivers about this topic. So we like to start by making sure that people understand where Toronto Public Health is coming from. So some of the underlying concepts of this program are that everybody has a sexuality. From the time you're born until the time you die, you always have a sexuality. Of course, that changes over time as we go through different developmental stages, but it's always there. And this is true no matter where we're from in the world. We also believe that kids have the right to answers to their questions, but in a developmentally appropriate way. I sometimes help out in the schools and I say to the students, ask me anything. There's no inappropriate question. But there are plenty of inappropriate answers. And that's our job as the caregivers and as the educators. It's our job to sort of sort that out. And that's a lot of what this workshop is about. We also believe that parents are the primary sex educators of their children, that ultimately they hold the control of what they would hope that their children would learn and when. But we also acknowledge that there are many other caregivers and adults that interact with their kids throughout the day, throughout youth centers and schools and daycare centers and things like that. So we acknowledge that, and that's why we have opened up this program to so many different groups. Now, one thing I'll mention is you can see that many of the slides as we go through have minimal writing on them and mostly using those graphics. And the reason that we do that is that in Toronto, we do a lot of our parenting programs through interpretation. And we find that this is just helpful to take the ease off of people who aren't reading in English, that worry when they see so many words on the screen, and we're able to have more of a conversation based on the images. So when I begin a group with adults and caregivers, I like to just get a sense of what their opinions are before we start. There's no right and wrong answers. It's just those opinions of wanting to know, is this a group that has been talking to their kids since they were born all about their bodies and their genitals and their consent? Or is this a group that feels more strongly about waiting until a certain age or not wanting to discuss these topics at all? Most often we end up with a room with quite a blend of people. But it's good to start out with sort of a discussion like this screen of just getting a sense of that. Now, I just finished saying I didn't have a lot of words on the screen, and now I'm showing a slide with all sorts of words. But mainly I use this slide in the community just to remind people of what all the different types of sexuality, what all the different things that the word sexuality can mean. Sometimes people are sitting in the room and they're saying, you know, our kids are like 2 and 3 years old. Why is this sex educator even here? And I'll say, you know what? Sexuality means a lot of things. And it can mean about relationships. It can mean about media. It can mean about reproduction, its expression, identity. All of these things, they can make sense at any age, just in different ways. But the next slide I use to really demonstrate to people, this is really a lot of what we are talking about here. So these are all images that our children might interact with every day. I didn't have to Google porn to find any of this stuff. These are all things that I can see between my front door and the bus stop with my young children. There's one there, it's a magazine cover of a girl taking her bathing suit off. This was a really popular magazine a couple of years ago. My daughter was about 2.5, and I was in the drugstore with her, and the drugstore keeps the magazines down low, right where you check out. So I'm there buying milk or diapers or whatever I'm buying, And I turn around and my 2.5-year-old is like face to face with this woman in the picture. And I'm thinking, okay, she's not looking at it and being like, ooh, sexy. She's 2. But she's learning something. She's learning from the picture about body shape or body size or gender or, what we wear in public or don't wear, and, hair removal, whatever she's learning from this picture. Sometimes what we don't say about these things tells kids even more about the subject area. There's another one there that's a black and white picture of 3 women. Last summer, this was about a 2.5-story, maybe a 3-story billboard on the side of a building downtown Toronto, right across the street from the Royal Ontario Museum. I took my kids downtown to see, something at the museum, educational, and we're standing at the corner and they burst out laughing, looking at this picture, going, "Look, Mommy, you said we had to wear clothes." And I'm saying, well, clearly we all have different rules. And suddenly I'm now talking about nudity and boundaries and things in the middle of downtown, not a conversation I had necessarily expected at that moment, but these things just come up. It's a shoe advertisement, by the way, which makes sense, right? Because they're only wearing their shoes. So I like to talk about where children are already learning about sexuality. Well, certainly they're learning at home from the families and adults that live in their house. Even pre-verbally, they're learning about who's changing their diapers. How do we react when they're touching their own genitals? Who's changing which adults are changing clothes in front of them? And what are we calling their body parts and things like that. As kids get a little older and they're entering playgroups or daycares or schools, we quickly are figuring out other people's families do things very different from our own family. People have different words for body shape, for body parts. People have different levels of privacy. Some families shut the door when they go to the bathroom. Some are all in the tub together. Even their teachers and other caregivers will have different levels of comfort with the subject area. Kids learn a tremendous amount about sexuality from television and movies, even if they're only watching children's programming. It's full of sexuality messages. My daughter really loves the movie Frozen, as so many little kids do. And sometimes at night, I'll go to kiss her goodnight, and she'll try to hold my face and say, "No, kiss me like Kristoff." And I think my adult brain says, boy, I don't want to make out with you. They have the big kiss there at the end of the movie. Yet to her, all that she understands is that at the end of the movie, that's how they're expressing that they love each other. And she's trying to express to me that she loves me. So it gets confusing sometimes, some of these sexuality messages that our kids pick up on. And of course, the internet and social media in 2019, we can't not talk about these things. Even our youngest family members, maybe even pre-verbally, probably know how to touch the screen and move on to the next YouTube video. It's very common. And when children are watching perhaps YouTube videos of other kids even just playing with toys, they're hearing language, they're hearing about gender and things like that all the time. As kids get older, they're interacting with the internet directly. Once upon a time, we used to say to families, "Oh, keep your computer in the middle of the room and then everyone can see what you're looking at on there and we can't have any funny business." But my phone is much more powerful than some of the computers these days that my kids interact with. So my kids know how to use my phone. One of them is 11 years old. So it makes sense that he knows how to pick up my phone and Google something. We need to be talking about these things, not necessarily full on restricting them and saying, don't use the internet, but we need to be talking about using the internet wisely. So we like to have a conversation with people in the community about what some of their common worries might be when they think about talking to children about sexuality. We often hear things like, they're nervous to say certain words. They're nervous to say too much. They don't want to lose their child's innocence. A lot of people are still worried that if they talk about sex, their kids will want to run out and try it. Sometimes I worry about just not even knowing the answers. There's lots of new sort of odd concepts out there in sexuality that I have to try to keep up with the kids on. we get all sorts of different answers, but I think a lot of the worries that, a lot of where worries stem from are how we were talked to about sexuality when we were little. Who were our role models? Sometimes we look back at our own childhoods and thinking about how sex was either we were learning about it or hearing about it, things like that. Sometimes we look back and we have great memories. We're like, oh, I remember learning about it in school. It was hilarious. And other times we look back and we have not so great memories. So certainly a lot of this can trigger some of our own childhood things as we're talking to children. And sometimes we just don't have a lot of memories about it at all. I don't really remember somebody saying that to me. So sometimes we're just unsure of how to talk to kids about these subjects in general because we really haven't had a role model to show us how to talk to kids about this. We call this our family of origin exercise. When we're working in the community, we get into groups and we think about all sorts of different questions about our own childhood when we were growing up. Some people choose to share and discuss this in a group. Some people like to just think about the different questions and reflect on them themselves. But we use all of these various questions just to think about how have all of these things from our childhood impacted us now that we're the adult educators. Sometimes we look back and we say it was awesome the way it was. I'm going to do it just like that. And sometimes we reflect back and we say, you know what? I'm going to do it differently with my kids. I'm going to talk about things in a different manner. We can have some fun discussions stemming from all of this. We put different types. These are just some of the questions. But we put questions on cards and pass them out and just have people sort of reflect on them. Talking about gender roles in your family, talking about words used for body parts. How was nudity expressed or discussed? You know, if your family growing up never spoke about sexual orientation, and now suddenly children are talking about it quite a bit in our society, sometimes it's like we're almost making it up on the job. We're working it out as we go. So having these discussions can be helpful to adults just to even understand we can go easy on ourselves because we're all learning. We then bring the conversation back to ourselves as adults, either parents or caregivers, and we think about how talking about sexuality with children of lots of ages, but especially even young children, can give us some excellent opportunities. We can think about it very positively. So it gives us an opportunity to clarify some confusing things that kids might see. You know, why does my body look so different from the dollies? Why are those dogs dancing like that? Why did this girl forget her clothes today on the way to the demolition site? It's confusing. Sometimes even for adults, it's confusing. And I think it can be fun to be the smart person in the room. I'm the adult that has some answers. And so we get to share information. We also have an opportunity to share information while giving some value statements. This is a little bit of where there is a difference between what parents can share and what professionals who are talking to children who are not their own children share. When parents are sharing their values, they do just that. They can share their own family values. They can say, you know what, in our house, I don't want you to wear that. Or, you know, in our family, I'm hoping you wait until this age until you date, or whatever they want to say. So we want people to examine what are their family values that they want to impart on their children. And for professionals, we need to ensure that they remember that they are imparting not their personal values, but they're imparting the values of where they are working, either their child care center or their school board or what have you. So, you know, they're able to say something like, you know, in our center, we don't use that language, that's hurtful. Or in our play center, when we play demolition site, we wear our clothes. Whatever it is, but they need to be just reminded that it's not necessarily their own family values. I often use this little comic when I'm talking to professionals. It says, wait, Do you have any protection? Well, my mom said babies only come from two people who really love each other, so I think we're in the clear. And it kind of serves as a reminder of that difference between facts and values. And that interplay, when we're talking about sexuality, it can be hard to pull apart facts and values. So keeping in mind that hopefully messaging like this will be a little clearer by the time they're teenagers, but sticking to the facts, especially if it's not your own children. So another opportunity we have when we're talking to children about their bodies and sexuality is an opportunity to give them some self-esteem messages and some body messages of, hey, who's ultimately in charge of your body? If you don't know all the names of your body parts, you may not feel at your best to help protect them as best you can. We like to let kids know, hey, every part of your body has a name and it has a function, and aren't you amazing? And now we talk about body ownership. I understand that young people in our society, they don't necessarily get full consent over what happens to their body, but we can even practice consent even with very young people. I mean, my little one at home would probably never take a bath if given the choice of full body autonomy. But I can give her choices and say, well, it is your body and I want it to be clean and healthy. So would you like a bath in 5 minutes or in 10 minutes? But your body's getting in the tub. So we can give consent practice around their body for when they get a little bit older. Getting back to the naming body parts area, when we do our exercise, looking back at our family of origin, at our childhoods, we often come up with some really great and interesting lists of words that maybe our families used for body parts. It's not the most common thing that growing up, we knew all of the anatomical doctor names for body parts. There's often lots of names either in another language or sort of a secret word or this and that. Lots of words are used. Adults who don't live at my house would understand in case I need help. Kids know that there's more than one word for things. You know, it could be your head and your noggin and your melon and your brains and all the different things I might call it at home. But my child knows that if she's at the daycare, she needs to call it her head. That's the word they understand. Or, you know, the daycare that my kids have gone to, they have made it very clear that they use the words penis or vulva or bum or what have you. They've made it clear of what the words are. Knows that if she's at the daycare, she needs to call it her head. That's the word they understand. Or, you know, the daycare that my kids have gone to, they have made it very clear that they use the words penis or vulva or bum or what have you. They've made it clear of what the words are that are to be used in the center. And after that, kids can use other words too. Even adults use other silly words sometimes. We know that it can be a proven safety technique for kids to better protect themselves if they know the names of all of their body parts. That if a child can say, no, don't touch my penis, it implies that an adult has taken the time to talk to them about their body, and that child is more likely to go back and tell if something has gone wrong. And that can be a bit of a diversion technique. It's not to say that kids that know the names of all their body parts are safe from predators, but it's a tool in the safety kit. And having those discussions can usually be very helpful in the community if parents are a bit hesitant to use some of these words. We also know that it is a very important tool as well in disclosure, that a child needs to be understood about their body parts. And that is more, you know, disclosure is much more, there's an ease to it if the child can actually name their body parts. We know that if a child told their teacher, you know, someone at home wants to share my muffin, a teacher might say, well, sharing's nice. Sharing's the value of our classroom. You got to share. But perhaps didn't understand if that child was actually trying to get help if she called her vulva her muffin or something like that. Now, at this point, I always have to take a moment and just speak about the word vulva and the word vagina. It's the nurse in me, I can't help it. These words in English are often used a bit interchangeably. I would even argue that the word vagina is used much more often, but it's a bit of a misused word. Vaginas are actually inside. We can't see each other's vaginas, and children can't see each other's vaginas, so it is a bit of a misnamed body part. The outside part of the body that people could see is called a vulva in English. So in my mind, this is a more appropriate word for children to use, but it's great for adults in the community to know both of these words, as they may hear them used interchangeably or just one or the other. We have a lot of people that English is not their first language in our communities, and we like to do a lot of teaching just around this part of the language. I digress. Now, we get questions sometimes about using the term private parts. And a lot of the books that we look at that are available to parents and communities also talk about private parts or middle parts or parts that are covered by the bathing suit. And we like to make sure that people remember not everybody has the same bathing suit covered parts. Again, it's very important to ensure that kids know what are the parts that we're talking about and name them. Because again, we just don't want that sort of distraction. It could also definitely be argued that your whole body is your private part. I don't need you to wait until somebody touches a private part of your body before you tell me. I'd like you to tell me if someone touches you anywhere that makes you uncomfortable, or looks at you in a way, or says something to you in a way that makes you uncomfortable. We spend a lot of time in the community giving that message of, encouraging parents to let their kids know your whole body is your private thing, and anybody touching you anywhere, I'm happy to talk about it with you and try to help. This ties into our safety messaging. So again, an opportunity when talking to kids about their bodies and sexuality, it's a great opportunity to talk about safety. And as well, privacy and social cues. Young people in our society, they're not afforded a ton of privacy, but at the same time, we then expect them to keep their privacy about them. We need to do this by teaching privacy, even when we're changing them in public or helping them in the bathroom, because at some point we will expect them to be able to do that on their own and to safely, keep hold of their boundaries. The picture at the bottom of the screen, the little one with her finger in her nose, it kind of represents for us a picture of a child with their hand down their pants. It's a similar thing to see a child with their finger in their nose or their hands on their genitals. Kids just perhaps haven't picked up on some of the social cues around this yet. So gentle reminders are what we would recommend rather than shaming. There are lots of different reasons why kids might touch their genitals, and certainly ruling out things like, hey, are you itchy? Are you sore? Do you have to pee? Once those are ruled out, chances are a child is touching themselves because it feels nice, or they're self-soothing. A lot of kids do that to calm themselves down. It's not just as easy to say to a child, do that later in private. Not every child gets private time later. Lots of kids share a bedroom. Lots of kids have somebody with them in the bathroom when they're in the tub. There's lots of times that we would consider private time that they don't get. So encouraging children to find the private time that makes sense for their developmental level, and allowing sometimes for this to happen. If they want to touch themselves and they're in the bathroom, you know what, when my kid's in the tub, maybe I'll just turn around and wash the sink for a minute, give them a moment of private time, and then I'll turn back and say, wow, okay, we're going to wash another part now, let's move on. Rather than saying like, gross, don't do that, don't touch that part of your body. Because that doesn't necessarily teach privacy, that just teaches about body shaming and valuing different parts of the body in different ways. We also know if a child is trying to calm down and self-soothe, by yelling at them doesn't really help calm them down at all. So another opportunity we have when talking to kids about sexuality is certainly talking about gender stereotypes. I think I could do a full hour webinar just talking about this, so I will try to be brief. But certainly gender stereotypes are pervasive in our society, and you have an opportunity to address those how you see fit. I would argue, though, our biggest opportunity when kids come to us with questions about sexuality, about their bodies, is our opportunity to promote ourselves as a good person to ask questions to. Say, hey, I'm here for you. I'm open to questions. The way that we answer a question is often far more valuable than what we say. And I think that can help us adults take some pressure off ourselves, knowing that our tone can hold a lot more weight sometimes than our words. If a child walked in and said, you know, why is my bum itchy? And I went, ew, are you serious? Gross. Go wash your hands. Yuck. She didn't learn why her bum's itchy, but she quickly learned that Jen doesn't want questions about the bum. She makes me embarrassed. She makes me go wash my hands. She makes me leave. Maybe next time I have a bum question, I'll go ask somebody else. But if they walked in and said, why is my bum itchy? And I said, you know what? I'm on the computer right now. Why don't I come meet you in the bathroom in 2 minutes? She still didn't learn immediately why her bum itches, but she did know Jen's open to talking about these things. There's also a time and place for it. So I use this slide in the community sometimes as a bit of a joke. All the lovely times that we can talk to our kids about bodies and sexuality and safety, you know, the family jog. My table is far more chaotic than some of these breakfast tables here. Bedtime is sometimes a great time, as kids may want to just talk about anything rather than turn the light out. But sometimes I'll pull a book out at night and I'll say to my kids, like, oh, we're going to read this great book about the body. And they'll go, oh, I wanted to read the one about the dinosaur. And now they're not listening, right? They're not into it. So with children, usually the best time to talk to them is right in the moment. It's right when they're ready. You know, we're walking down the street and we see a naked statue, and now we're going to talk about bodies. Or we see somebody pregnant, now we're going to talk about babies. It can be difficult for the adults because it's hard for us to prepare for this, but this is often when kids are most ready for this information. So we can offer a couple of tools that can just help us prepare for some of those in the moment discussions. This one we call the 5-point plan. And it's trying to get 5 points into our answer when answering a question for kids. And it sounds like a lot, but chances are you're probably already doing most of this already. The first point being like a self-esteem message. Hey, great question. Aren't you smart? Aren't you clever? Letting them know I'm not mad when you bring questions like this to me. The second one is asking back. Oh, what do you think? What do you know about that? Where did you get thinking about that from? Who was talking about that? You wouldn't want to say it in a mean way, like, who said that? You're not going to get far with your answer. But just inquiring a little bit more about where this question came from can help guide your answer. It's kind of like that old joke where the child comes in and says, where did I come from? And the adult goes, wow, okay, well, here we go. There was a sperm and an egg. And the child says, wow, I thought I was from Toronto. You're like, oh, if I had just asked, what do you think? You might have answered a very different question and maybe given an answer that made more sense to the child in the moment. The third thing is giving a fact. This is the one that probably scares us the most, but quite frankly, the facts are the facts, so it's sometimes the easiest. It's really about practicing how big or how small of a fact you want to give. I usually start off small and I build on it, watching sort of how they handle it, how they continue to be interested, things like that. But the biggest part of the answer, the biggest opportunity we have is this opportunity to give a value statement and a bit of a responsibility plan for the kids. So letting them know what you want them to take away from this about their family values and about what their responsibility is in helping keep themselves and their friends safe. So an example of this, I watch a lot of sports with my kids on TV, and sports usually come on TV around 7 or 7:30 at night. And at 8 o'clock at night, the TV programming changes dramatically. It becomes adult programming, and suddenly there's advertisements for horror movies and sexy nighttime dramas and newsreel clips and all sorts of things. And sometimes it catches me a little off guard. So one night when my son was about 7, we were watching the Blue Jay game, and suddenly a commercial came on for 50 Shades of Grey. And a woman was bound to a chair, and somebody was holding her face and kissing her really tight, and you could see their tongues. And my son was like, whoa, why would somebody kiss like that? So I said, well, good question. That was my first 5-point plan point. At that stage, I didn't choose to do the ask back because I knew the context. I had been sitting right there with him when the commercial came on. So I switched over to the facts, and I said to him, well, sometimes adults kiss each other that way because they like the way it feels. And from there, I switched right into values and responsibility. I said, kids don't kiss each other like that. And if somebody wanted to kiss you like that, you could talk to me about it. I could help you. So I was able to take kind of this sexually charged question and shift it around sort of to where I wanted the answer to go. I wanted him to think more about what he needed from this, rather than really worrying about foreplay and bondage and French kissing and pleasure and all of that, because we were watching the Blue Jay game. I like to answer questions thinking about it from a child's point of view. Children developmentally are usually quite egotistical. They're thinking of themselves. Try to pose your answer in a way that might make sense for their developmental level, rather than bringing all of our adult brain and adult stuff to the table. Perhaps think about it from their point of view as best you can. And I also recommend thinking about it in ways of curiosity versus safety. Is this a topic that they are simply curious about and you could maybe take time to formulate your answer? Or do they require an answer fairly quickly to keep their body safe? A 3-year-old asking about where babies come from, they're not at imminent risk that they're going to accidentally make a baby with their body if they don't have all the facts by the end of the day. You can take some time, you can get some resources, you can get back to them. You'll have plenty of opportunities. They'll ask many times. But an 11 or 12-year-old, they require more information. Having information like babies come from people who are married or from people who love each other or when people lay down in bed together. These aren't factual answers. They're not going to help them when their bodies become at risk of actually making babies. So thinking about it from that point of view is also helpful often for professionals when they are questioning, is this an answer I should be answering or should the parents be answering it? We like to have discussions around the safety point of view. And do you feel comfortable allowing that child to continue through their day or through their time without this information until you can get to other sources? So it's an ongoing sort of context. And one of the last points that I like to make in my community presentations is just being aware of the weight of our language. We give a lot of weight to language. I had a parent group one night where there was a couple of parents there of a 4-year-old, and they said that she'd come home from kindergarten and said, how does the baby get out? And they were really embarrassed. I didn't just tell this story, did I? I told this story yesterday, so I was getting confused. They were really embarrassed, and they said, you know what, Jen, we told her the baby came out the belly button. And they were really embarrassed. And they said, we just didn't want to be that couple that told the child the baby comes out the vagina, and then she goes back to school and tells everybody the baby came out the vagina. So we had a discussion in the room about it and about language. And I at one point said, with a 4-year-old, perhaps you could have said, well, babies often come out the vagina, but we talk about that more at home in our family. And the one parent laughed at me. He said, that's ridiculous. There's no way you're going to tell a 4-year-old that a baby comes out of vagina and she's not going to go tell everybody. That's like super exciting. And I said, well, it's super exciting to us because we're adults and we know about all the magical things vaginas can do. But her vagina at 4 years old, it does nothing. It does not push out babies. It does not menstruate. It doesn't have sex. It doesn't even pee. It's not even technically the right spot. Her vagina doesn't do anything. So by saying this part of your body may one day deliver a baby, it could just be an interesting fun fact that doesn't hold half the weight that the parents worried that it might hold. We give language some of this credit sometimes by skirting around, not wanting to say it, by saying vajayjay, or the odd things that adults do sometimes around this language. Kids pick up on that very quickly. The kids in the schoolyard are not running around going like elbow, elbow, making each other laugh. The elbow is just simply not funny in our society the way other body parts are. So by normalizing some of this language, it can carry a lot of weight in just being another body part. Another part of the language that I like to mention is around nuanced language. Sometimes kids are picking up on things we say, and sometimes they're picking up on things that we choose not to say. They can pick up messages around who are safe adults to talk to, or who are safe adults they might want to open up more to. If my son came up to me and said, when I grow up, do I have to be a dad? Perhaps I'd answer him by saying, well, yeah, you're going to grow up and get married, and she's going to have a baby, and you'll be daddy. I'll get to be grandma. It's going to be awesome. I can't wait. And maybe that's going to happen in his life. I don't know. He's still a child. So perhaps I could answer that same question by saying, well, when you grow up, you may choose to get married. You might become a parent. You might want to be called daddy. I'd be grandma. I can't wait. So he probably would hear the same answer, but maybe he also heard, mommy still loves me if I don't get married. Mommy still loves me if I don't marry a woman, or if we don't become parents, or if I choose not to, or I can't become a parent, or I don't want to be called daddy. All these things may be in there that might be in his mind or might not. But why should I put it into his mind, right? Why not just be as open as possible? And that can be a really interesting discussion around language when we are talking to people who have many different languages in their house with nuances in all different ways. So it lends itself to a really interesting conversation. So I put in our contact information at this point. I have the resource sheets here again because I just wanted to mention, I think I have a couple of minutes left, and I just wanted to further mention a little bit about some of the resources that we talk about. We have a resource page you can see here in English. We have another one in French. Most of the books and resources that we have found sort of the English sources for, and that's probably because I can only read in English. But we certainly try to help people finding resources in other languages. We love to hand out these pages to parents in the community, make sure which ones are available in the library. This can help with the conversation going into the future. And as well as some of the websites on there. Some of the resources are for parents and caregivers to read themselves. Some are books that could be read directly to kids. And we tell people the books could be used in all different ways. Some of them, you could just point to pictures and talk about the things in your own words. Or sometimes you want to use the words later as if you made them up yourself. Or sometimes I'll sit down and actually read the books myself. I often use these next few slides here that I'll go through quickly just to show visually people what some of the books are, and to let them know that, you know what, books around sexuality and bodies, they don't have to be so scary. And sometimes once they've seen them, or if we can bring the books to the workshop and have people pass them around and look at them, they may be more likely to pick them up again later on. We try to put them into sort of different areas. We bring the puberty books even when we're talking to parents of toddlers, because I think it's never too early to start talking about puberty. Lots of books about gender. I often find the gender books a bit funny, because in my generation we find these books sometimes very exciting. This is like this new cool concept. But when I read them, I practice all these books on my own kids, and I read them to them and they go, yeah, whatever, wear whatever you want. And I think, oh yeah, your world is very different from the one that I grew up in. And we have the references for adults as well, leading them, just helping them to sort of find different resources in whatever way makes sense for them. So sometimes at the end of a workshop as well, we spend some time answering questions. If it's a particularly quiet group, I will sometimes pose a bunch of questions to them as if they were the kids, and how would they answer them. Sometimes we practice answering those questions together. Sometimes there are common questions that come out and come through. I'll just check in and see, are there any questions for us at this point? So feel free to send in some questions now. I thought what I could do, I'm just going to go back here to the page that has our information on it. And as well, I'm told that you can always send questions in afterwards as well, that they will get to me. I brought with me a couple of sort of common questions and scenarios that I get at the end of these workshops, and I thought if I wasn't receiving too many questions, I would go through a few of those. Is that all right? Okay. So one of the common questions that I get is from parents asking about bathing kids together, or bathing with their kids, changing or showering in front of their kids, things like that. That's a really common one that comes up. We're just switching my screen here. Thank you. Now I have to look at myself while I talk. No questions. Thank you. So that common question that we get about sort of at what age should we stop kids from being nude together, or what age should we stop changing in front of our kids, that's a really, really common one. And our messaging through public health is bodies are bodies. If there's nothing sexual going on, it's just bodies. So there is no particular age that needs to stop. Whoever is involved, like whoever's in the tub, if somebody doesn't want to do this anymore, they make that rule. So if, you know, I like to bathe my kids together because it saves me a lot of time, but at one point my older child said, I don't want her in the tub anymore, I don't want this. And at that point he made the rule that now we stop doing this. And it was a bummer for me, because now I have to run 2 baths in a row, but the rule was made, and that's fine. I had a friend who every evening he showered with his daughter, and it was like their special time. And then one time while showering, she turned around and just pulled on his penis, and he went, we're done, we don't do this anymore. And he was the one in that family that made that rule. It had made him uncomfortable, and it was time to stop. And she was a bit sad about it, but at the same time, the rule, you know, the rule is made by anybody who wants to make the rule. And there is no hard and fast rule about at what age that becomes a problem in a family. Another very common question that we get is around at what age should we talk to kids about making babies and about sexuality, that kind of intercourse. And again, I don't have a perfect answer for that. With our center, we like to, like with Toronto Public Health, we like to talk about different ideas as to why it could be talked about at different ages. I don't think that talking to a 2 or 3-year-old would do any harm. They probably wouldn't quite understand the whole thing, but certainly you could certainly discuss these types of things. I often encourage adults to look at the school curriculum in their province and say, at what age are they going to be talking about it at school? In Ontario, we often talk about it around grade 5. And I would say there are definitely some kids in the room during that discussion that are hearing this for the very first time. And that can be a little bit embarrassing for them to be hearing it in front of their peers for the first time. So I often recommend to parents, having that conversation at home before that comes up at school, just so that they can get their own family values and their own discussion about it at home. But we don't encourage sitting down and having a certain talk about it. We definitely encourage an ongoing conversation all the time of just being as open as possible. And I think that the other most common thing that I get is talking to parents and also child caregivers about what happens when there's differing value systems. And so, this is, again, one that we don't have a hard and rule for, but sometimes even within a family, there'll be different value systems. We'll talk and say, wow, on the way home from Grandpa said a whole lot, didn't he? That's not how we talk in our immediate family. Things like that, of just allowing kids a safe place to come home and have these discussions and just say, wow, your friends at school said something that we feel very differently about in our family. Let me tell you about how our family feels. Or childcare workers ensuring that, for sure they're going to work at some point with families that are going to have different family values than their own. This is just the world that we live in. So again, allowing kids to have a safe place to talk, helping kids to find as many, great adults to talk to as possible as kids get older. My kids may not always want to come to me, as much as it breaks my heart. Making sure that they know who are other safe adults that they could talk to, knowing that they could always come to me, but there are other people in their lives as well. So providing kids a safe place and some safe resources for themselves. And yeah, I don't know if we received any other questions. I think I've exhausted myself with all of my chatting. All right. So shall I say my goodbyes? I'll say my thank yous. Thanks to Boost very much for having Toronto Public Health come in. Allowing us to come in and speak about this topic. These types of discussions and workshops are available throughout the City of Toronto. They're free of charge, the resources as well. And others who are interested, please be in touch with Toronto Public Health Sexual Health Promotion. Feel free to contact one of us directly or through our intake number, and we're happy to continue the conversation. Thank you so much.